If you've ever shotgunned coffee powder from an MRE packet and you could hear colors, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, like, comment. That stuff helps me out quite a bit. Comment section is out of control. Scroll down if you want to see it. If you guys are looking to support the channel, we have two venues. We have one, belts and t-shirts, both from Alonzo Defense Group. Discount code is Garand, no spaces. Only works on the belts. Sorry, guys. When it comes to ammunition, if you're looking to get some training in, you have two venues. You have Freedom Munitions, and you also have LAX ammunition. So if one of them has the ammo that you want, it's out of stock, go to the other one, 5% discount with Garand, no spaces. That's enough of that. Let's go ahead and let's talk about what our topic is for today. So today we are going to be talking about the Elcan Specter TR 1, 3, and 9 power optic. It's bizarre. It's a very odd optic, and it's probably to date the weirdest optic that I've reviewed. So it's hard to make a whole lot of comparisons of this optic to other optics that are currently on the market that are low power variable optics. And the reason for that is that they don't work quite like this optic works. So we're going to do our best to explain some of the trade-offs and benefits that you get from using this style of optic. Now, full disclosure, I did receive this optic directly from them, as I did a couple other optics from them. So is that going to influence me? No, I try to be as non-biased as possible. I've crapped on other products, you know, just because they're free doesn't mean I'm going to like them, because I have way too much free crap already. So in any case, that is full disclosure to you guys. So let's go ahead and talk about this beast. Before we get into it, first off, it is on a BCM 14.5 MCMR upper. So that's their M-LOK upper. It has the enhanced lightweight barrel. I'm a huge fan of it, but in case you're wondering, arrow lower, on all that good stuff. So not too much into that, but more on the optic. The optic is built like a tank. So we're gonna do pros, neutrals, and cons when it comes to this optic, just like we do with everything else. So first off, it is a 1, 3, and 9 power optic. What that means is depending on what setting you're on, you're either on 1 power, much like a red dot, 3 power, kind of like some type of low-powered ACOG or something like that, and then you're on 9 power, more akin to what you'd see in a DMR-ish type optic or something like that, like a Leupold or something like that. So you run into some trade-offs, because it sounds really good when you first hear it. You're like, this is going to be awesome. There are trade-offs. There are good and bad things about this optic, but that's for you guys to decide if it's going to be good for you and if it's going to work for what you do. So I can't decide that for you. I wish I could. I want to say that this is basically marine proof because it is pretty indestructible. Like other Elcan optics, it is extremely tough. They're built for combat, they're made for combat because you expect a lot of durability from them, and that's no different with this optic. Now, has this optic been taken to combat? Not by me. I'm sure it's gone into combat somewhere, but in my time bumping it and throwing it on the ground and all that kind of stuff, it's held zero and it's been completely fine. It's never broken or anything like that. So I'd expect no less from an Elcan optic, and that's my general impression that I have from using this for about the 8,000 or so rounds that I've fired while this optic has been mounted to various weapons. Now, these do come in 5.56 and 7.62 versions. I am not aware if there are any differences structurally within the optic itself, whether or not that changes between them, but I have no doubt that they can handle a lot more recoil. Elcans are pretty legendary for their ability to handle some really tough guns like the Scar. They typically handle that recoil fine versus other optics that a lot of times break from that type of recoil. So Elcans are pretty sturdy optics. The windage and elevation adjustments are really simple. They are external, so that has been a huge point of contention with a lot of optics that are coming from Elcan, is they have the external adjustments because people are afraid that if it gets knocked a certain way, it's going to bump out and you know it's going to lose that ability to hold zero. I've never seen that from any of the Elcan optics that I've dealt with. Now, that being said, caveat, I've only dealt with more recent generations of Elcan, so I'm sure that previous ones likely did have issues that were then resolved. With this particular optic, I haven't noticed any zero drift or anything like that as I've switched between magnification settings or when it's been bumped. So that's been fine for me. Each click is approximately 0.1 mils. So for my guys who do more long range work, that's going to make a lot more sense for you. But suffice to say that for what I do, the type of shooting that I do, that it is plenty precise for what it is made to do. So the windage and elevation clicks, perfect. One cool thing about the Elcan optics compared to a lot of low power variable optics like the Optic Voodoo or the Vortex Razor HD Gen 2 or anything like that is that the eye box and the eye relief on the Elcan Specter series of optics is extremely forgiving. So with a lot of low power variable optics, you have to be at a precise point in order to see directly through the optic. And if you're not at that precise point, you're not going to see through it. You're going to get a lot of scope shadow, which is that kind of black circle that's kind of dancing around that optic as you're moving around and that type of stuff. You don't see that so much with Elcans. You do to some extent or another because it still is a magnified optic at various settings, but it is a lot more forgiving than the typical low-powered variable optic. So because of that, I found that shooting in kind of odd shooting positions around cars, into barricades, that type of thing, is a lot easier with the Elcan series of optics than it is with any type of low-powered variable. So that is definitely going in its favor. And that goes for being at really high magnification settings. So for example, when I'm at one power, switching to 3 and 9, I don't have to do any head placement and kind of switching to get that good sight picture as I'm scrolling through those settings. That's pretty cool because I've definitely had to kind of do the little shuffle trying to find that correct head placement when working with other optics. So that is something that it definitely does have going for it. And beyond that, the actual eye box, so how far I can move kind of off center and still see through the optic, is pretty good. At 1x, it's extremely forgiving. Of course, moving up magnifications, it's not that bad compared to, say, like the typical low power variable optic. It's a lot better and easier to deal with. So that is something that the Elcan Specter TR and the DR and all those types of optics had going for them. So pretty cool. Another thing I really like about it, and another way that they marine proofed this particular optic, was making the ability to switch between various settings very simple. So compared to rotating a ring or something like that, on this optic, all you do is just rotate the dial. It goes from 1 to 3, from 3 to 9, and that's it. So 3 settings. That's about as high as most Marines can count, so I'm pretty sure they're going to be okay, and they're going to be able to get that. So, because I know it gets a little weird when you're like on a continuum. It's like, where does the numbers end? You know, because does, you know, the number 1 really ever end? It's a big question, and something I can't answer for Marines. But in any case, I think it's a very simple system. It's easy to use. It's a lot quicker than a lot of the low power variable optics where you have to twist that ring, where it's often you have resistance and that type of thing. And there are, you know, various tricks that you can do to get that to turn quicker, but I just have always found that the Elcan series of optics to be simpler. So I think it's an elegant solution and it works well. As far as the reticle is concerned, I need you guys to understand that I don't have any type of, you know, scout sniper training or anything like that. I've never done any of that type of work. I've worked with them and I've done little stalking courses, but I've never been through a formal course, through one of those formal courses. So my grasp on long range shooting is somewhat tenuous and self-taught to some extent or another. Now, I do have a couple of long-range courses coming up, but I want to be clear that my understanding of long-range reticles is not the best. There are people who clearly best me and clearly know far more than I will likely ever know in my lifetime. That being said, from what I do know, the reticle is extremely usable and well made. I have no problems with that. I do think that there are better reticles for combat usage out there, such as the ACSS from Primary Arms. I'm a big fan of that. But that being said, I believe that this reticle is very precise and it works well. Now, what comes further into that is the red dot. So at 1x, if you turn up the illumination setting, it goes from 1 to 5. When you turn that up, you get that red dot at 1x. When you switch from 1 to 3, that red dot will go away and then it will then illuminate the reticle itself. So kind of a nifty little feature. As far as night vision settings, I haven't used this with night vision. Typically these magnified optics don't work very well. If I'm going to be doing any shooting under night vision, I'm going to be using a different optic with a night vision setup on it, or if I'm doing anything short range, I'm going to be using the BE Myers-Mall or some type of IR laser illumination aiming device or something like that. But the red dot is very bright. I had no problems with it in daylight or in any conditions, so it works well. It's about aim point bright, so no problems there. All right, so we're going from the pros. Let's talk about some things I'm kind of neutral on. They're not good or bad. They're just kind of trade-offs that you run into moving from different types of optics like the Optic Voodoo and those types of things to something like the Elcan Specter. So the field of view is very narrow, and that's your trade-off. So compared to a lot of optics, you're not seeing quite as much. So what does that mean for you? At 1 power, it's not that big of a deal. because you're pretty much looking all around the optic as it is. When you get into 3 and 9, it's kind of a trade-off, because the less field of view you have, the more zoomed in it looks and that type of thing. I still would like to be able to see more around my target. So again, it does depend on what you do and precisely what you're doing with the magnification, whether that 9 power is for target ID or actual firing of rounds and that type of thing. So to give you guys the numbers, at 100 meters, at 1 power, you're going to see 28.7 meters. At 3 power, at 100 meters, you're going to see 10.5 meters. And at 9 power, at 100 meters, you're going to see 3.5 meters. Now, comparing that to other optics, it is a much more narrow field of view. Now, I haven't seen that, it hasn't been that big of a deal to me, but no doubt a larger field of view is always nice. Now, I do want to say that even given the narrow field of view, that the 1 power is extremely excellent on the Elcan Specter TR. A couple other neutral things is weight. Straight up, this thing weighs a lot. It's at 1.9 pounds. Now, what is nice is that even though it's super long and that type of thing, and you think that the weight would be thrown off, most of the weight is far back on the optic. Because of that, it balances very well. So although, everyone's gonna get pissed, although it's 1.9 pounds, it doesn't feel like 1.9 pounds, and it's still easy to drive the weapon because so much of that weight sits further back. No matter what though, you're still carrying an extra 1.9 pounds on your rifle. Now, depending on what you do and whether or not you have to carry multiple optics for different mission sets, the Elcan Specter TR might be able to fill those roles and make your overall loadout lighter. But still, there's no doubt that the optic is heavy compared to a lot of other optics that are out there. That being said, I think it brings a lot to the field. So again, another thing you need to decide if that's going to be a problem given what you do. Finally, one thing that I'm kind of neutral on, and I know some people will likely accuse me of favoritism on, is tint. So at 1 power, there is a very noticeable tint. It's kind of a yellowish, orangish tint when you're looking through the optic. At 3 and 9 power, it goes away. I'm not sure specifically, I'm not an engineer, why that happens. I'm just a shooter, so I'm just kind of telling you guys how I see it. Now, that tint isn't super noticeable, especially when you're shooting fast and doing all that good stuff. But I think I'd want to point out, if I'm being super critical, that it is definitely there. So we've talked about pros, some things I'm somewhat neutral on just now. Let's talk about some cons. It is big. It's a large optic. There's no getting around that. There is, even on a 14.5 gun right here, you can see that I am kind of at a premium when it comes to rail space. So that can be a problem. Another problem could be is if you're running an IR device on top of your weapon, that might get in trouble because it does sit somewhat low. So if you're running especially like a D-ball, it's probably a no-go. So running a PEC 15 or a maul where it's kind of offset, or putting that IR device on the side of your rifle, is probably going to be something that you need to do in order to have this optic clear over. Otherwise, you're going to have that shadow of that device sitting in your sight picture. It does sit at approximately 1.5 inches above, so it's approximately a little bit around absolute, just right above. So it does work with most things, just something to be aware of going into that. The biggest problem that I have seen with this optic, and my biggest criticism of it, has been the 9 power. So the 9 power is crisp, it is clear, it is very crisp and clear, like everything is super vivid. But the problem is that the reticle is somewhat translucent and ill-defined at 9 power. Because of that, there can be certain situations, especially if the target's like kind of gray or something like that, where the reticle can kind of get lost on the target. So that kind of sucks. Now, that being said, if you're in low light, the reticle is going to be illuminated and it's no longer a problem. But in the daylight hours, that illumination is not really showing through. I have had it happen to me a couple times. Now, that being said, no matter what, the 9X is very usable. It's very easy to target ID and do that type of stuff. But that is my biggest complaint when it comes to the 9 power on this particular optic. Now, it's not all conditions. It's not like 100% of the time I'm looking through 9 power and that thing's completely unusable. It's a very small percentage of the time that it's not usable, but it is still a complaint for an optic that costs as much as this optic does. And that is probably my last complaint, which is this optic is super expensive. We're talking about $3,000 plus, around $3,000 to $3,200. That's a lot of money for an optic. So when I look at this optic, this is an optic that I look at as probably being some type of unit purchase or a department purchase. Maybe not something that you're going to purchase on your own. If you do, you can do it if it's something that you need. It's just so much money, and that kind of sucks. So I wish it were cheaper, but all these Elcan optics are typically a little bit more expensive for whatever reason, whether it be engineering and materials or whatever it is. So those are my cons when it comes to this optic. So we've talked about a lot of things when it comes to this optic. I can't make the choice for whether this optic is for you or not for you, right? It's really interesting. It took a different approach to the low power variable optic market, and I really like that they did that, because a lot of times people don't need anything between like a 1 and a 3 or a 3 and a 6. People just switch directly to those magnification levels. I like that they kind of cut those out and you just go from a 1, 3 to a 9 power. I think that's innovative. I really like the way they did that. I've always been a fan of these types of optics, so good on them for that. Now, of course, there are trade-offs like we talked about. You have a more narrow field of view, but at the same time, your eye relief and your eye box are a lot better. So if things that are really important to you are being able to shoot from those unconventional positions and having that target ID ability, or that ability to shoot in and around weird barricades and barriers, because that's happening to you a lot depending on what you do, or whether you're a 3-gunner and you need those type of legs, I think this is a good optic for you. Now, if you're looking for just amazing clarity at long distance at 9 power, this probably isn't the optic for you, because that reticle isn't super duper the best at 9 power. There are better reticles that do that. But if you're looking for something that to kind of bridge that gap between a red dot and kind of that DMR type optic, I think that the Elcan Specter TR is a really good choice, and you won't be sad about getting it. Maybe your wallet will be sad. That's actually a very real possibility. But it's a good optic. It's built well, and it does what it does well. Again, there are just trade-offs there, and you need to decide for yourself whether or not those are going to work for you. So, can't make that choice for you, but no matter what, this optic looks freaking cool. Big but cool. But we also know that you're not going to look cool without training. Guys, I have a couple different companies I want to pitch to you guys here. Bear Solutions, Cogworks, and also Esoteric. All good guys, all teach very good courses. I'm going to put the links down in the description. Go down there, take a look at that. If that's the type of training that you want, you'll be hard-pressed to find some better classes out there. Guys, thank you for tuning. Really appreciate you guys watching. And as always, stay looking cool, and I've got nothing else for you. Guys, if you live on base, don't buy from dealerships right off base. They're going to rip you off. Usually. Mostly. Don't do it. Just don't do it.